The Book of the Dead sounds like one of the darkest titles in ancient history. It suggests a book filled with endings, loss, and final silence. But that title can mislead us, because for ancient Egyptians, this was not simply a book about death. It was a collection of sacred knowledge, ritual words, and protective instructions designed to help a person move beyond the limits of ordinary life. The familiar name makes the text feel like a symbol of the grave, but the deeper meaning points somewhere else, toward transformation, renewal, judgment, memory, and the hope of continuing in another form. And that is where the story becomes more complicated. If the Book of the Dead was not really about death, then what was it truly trying to protect? Was it protecting the body, the soul, the name, the memory of a person? Or was it protecting something even more important, the possibility that identity could survive after the visible world had ended? Most people know the Book of the Dead as a mysterious Egyptian funeral text. In popular imagination, it is often treated like a single ancient book, almost like a secret manual of death. The name itself shapes the way we see it. It sounds final. It sounds dark. It sounds like a book written for the dead alone. But that popular image is incomplete. The text was not one fixed book in the modern sense. It was not a single story with one author and one standard version. It was a collection of spells, prayers, instructions, and ritual formulas. Different manuscripts could include different selections. Some were written on papyrus. Others could appear on objects connected to burial and protection. So the first misunderstanding begins with the title itself. Why does that matter? Because when we reduce the Book of the Dead to a book about death, we also reduce ancient Egyptian belief to something darker and simpler than it really was. We make it seem as though the Egyptians were obsessed only with endings, when their texts suggest a much more complex concern. They were asking how a person could continue, how a name could endure, how the soul could move through uncertainty, how the moral life of a person might matter after the body was gone. In that sense, the Book of the Dead was not just about what happens after life. It was about what life must become in order to survive judgment, transformation, and memory. The stakes were not only religious, they were human. The hidden perspective is this. The Book of the Dead may be better understood as a guide for becoming, not a book of ending. Its ancient Egyptian title is often translated as coming forth by day. That phrase changes the atmosphere completely. It does not point only downward into darkness. It points outward toward emergence, movement, and light. This does not mean the text ignored death. Death was part of the journey, but it was not the entire meaning of the journey. The person who used these texts was imagined as someone who needed knowledge. They needed words to speak, names to recognize, dangers to pass, and truths to affirm. In this worldview, survival was not passive. It required preparation. The afterlife was not simply a place one entered. It was a landscape one had to navigate. This is where the source difference matters. Modern audiences often hear Book of the Dead and imagine one canonical text. but museum and academic descriptions make clear that it was a collection of ritual writings. British Museum describes the title as a modern term for a collection of spells used to help the deceased enter the afterlife. The Met Museum describes these texts as incantations, spells, and prayers designed to help achieve eternal afterlife. ISAC at the University of Chicago frames the text even more strongly, as spells connected to transformation into an immortal divine state. That difference matters because it changes the center of the story. The modern title emphasizes the dead. The ancient function emphasizes the journey. The popular image emphasizes mystery. The historical material emphasizes preparation, transformation, and hope. And when we compare those perspectives, the text becomes less like a dark book of endings and more like a sacred technology of continuity. But there is a contradiction at the heart of it. The Book of the Dead is famous because it is associated with death. Yet much of its purpose was to resist death as a final definition. It tried to preserve the person's name. It tried to protect the body and the soul. It gave the deceased words to speak in the world beyond ordinary life. It imagined judgment not only as punishment or reward, but as a moral test of truth, balance, and identity. This is the turning point. The text was not merely asking, what happens when someone dies? It was asking, what must remain true for a person to keep existing? That is a very different question. The emotional conflict behind the Book of the Dead is not fear alone. It is uncertainty. Ancient Egyptians imagined the afterlife as meaningful, but not automatic. A person could hope for renewal, but that hope required ritual care, moral confidence, and sacred knowledge. The journey beyond life involved gates, names, protective words, and judgment. Behind all of that is a deeply human concern. What if a life can be forgotten? What if a name disappears? What if the person one was in life cannot survive the passage into eternity? That may be why the text feels so powerful even today. It is not only about ancient religion. It is about the human desire to be remembered correctly, to be judged fairly, and to continue in some form beyond disappearance. The emotional weight is not in the darkness of death. It is in the hope that something meaningful can endure. The bigger meaning of the Book of the Dead is that ancient Egypt did not treat death as a simple ending. It treated it as a transition that required knowledge, order, language, and moral balance. This tells us something profound about Egyptian culture. Words mattered, names mattered, ritual mattered, memory mattered. A person was not only a body. A person was a network of identity, speech, reputation, spirit, and cosmic order. That may be why the text survived so powerfully in modern imagination. Even when its title misleads us, its deeper question still feels familiar. How do we prepare for the unknown? What part of us deserves to continue? And who decides whether a life has been lived in balance? The Book of the Dead is not just an artifact from ancient Egypt. It is a mirror of one of humanity's oldest concerns, the hope that life has meaning beyond the moment it disappears from view. So perhaps the Book of the Dead was never truly about death in the way its name suggests. It was about passage. It was about protection. It was about memory. It was about the belief that a human life could be tested, transformed, and carried into another kind of dawn. The title makes us look toward the end. But the ancient idea asks us to look beyond it. And maybe that is the question the text still leaves behind. If death was not the final subject of the Book of the Dead, then what were the Egyptians really trying to keep alive?